Welcome to episode 53 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alistair Meldrum.
And myself, Jane Bond.
And the first episode of 2025. So Happy New Year, Jane.
And Happy New Year to you as
Are
well,
you
Alistair.
Are you used to this Scottish tradition yet of wishing everybody Happy New Year all the way into February?
Yeah, you know, I'm happy with that. It's like wishing people Happy Christmas all the way from November.
You got used to that yet?
Yeah.
So this week we have John Crawford, who some of the older people in the waste sector will remember John Crawford vividly from his years in, well, I knew him latterly at East Ayrshire Council, but he's a legend in Scotland in terms of waste management. He is now retired, but he does take us through a bit of a history lesson in terms of his career, Jane, doesn't he?
He does, yes. I was like, you've been around a bit. That sounds a bit rude, but, you know, I'm not saying he's old or anything, John, but you've kind of done quite a lot in your career. That's what I meant. Being politically correct.
So, no, absolutely. So, as per episode 52, we're going to talk about this BBC iPlayer series, Limbs in the Law, Catching a Killer. But before we do that, we're just going to touch on Scotland's landfill ban, which will be coming in at the end of 2025, Jane.
Right, so we've got Scotland's landfill ban due to come in at the end of 2025. And there's a report by SLR which is identifying this shortfall, this gap of 600,000 tonnes between there's been enough incineration capacity to take the shortfall from the landfills, which is all a bit kind of worrying. And then I think they also said that it was already out of date. The actual report is already out of date because some of the energy from waste facilities aren't actually progressing as they said they should be. So, yeah, interesting. So
I think there's a couple of sides to it. One is some of the waste energy aren't progressing as much. It might be more than 600,000 tonnes gap. There's then some of the landfill sites are closing earlier than planned. So then there's net, if it does need to go to landfill, where's it going to go? And then there's, if it is going south of the border, you're talking at the current rate of landfill tax, that's going to be £75 million in revenue landfill tax going to HMRC rather than staying in Scotland to Revenue Scotland. So big impact.
But what gets me, right?
Even if you just think of the vehicle numbers, and you go.
I was just going to say, what gets me though is, right, it's already been sort of delayed once or twice, and you kind of think, well, why aren't we in a position yet? Once. And it's like, why aren't we in a position that we've dealt with that? I'm not.
Well, I think there's a real balance. Is there not? Because there's a real balance between getting enough capacity and having overcapacity. So at the moment, there's no, in theory, you're not allowed another waste energy in Scotland because you won't get planning for it. So it's trying to, I think what they've failed to realise is landfill used to be really flexible. Landfill could go up and down, in terms of tonnage really easily. But a waste energy plant can't. Once it's got a maximum design capacity, and quite often you'll hardly ever reach it. And then the other thing that was talked about at the meeting the other day is what happens when these plants go down. How we're going to manage that waste when the plants are down for maintenance, or say one has a big technical problem then that it's broken down for a month or 2 months. How are we going to manage it? So lots of challenges. And the other one was, if you work out that tonnage of waste going south of the border to a landfill site, you're talking about 90 vehicles a day to transport it. So you could need 90 drivers and 90 vehicles, and there'll not be 90 vehicles and drivers free in the system at the moment to do that. So
no.
It's a rapidly looming problem that needs a solution.
I think as well, it's like they were talking about, it's not, perhaps it's bad, but it's not so bad if you're moving it from the Central Belt, but if you move it from like Aberdeen and Inverness and, way up there, that's a long way.
Yeah. You'll be lucky. Even from the Central Belt to the landfill sites in England, you'll be lucky if you can do. You'll only be able to do one load a day. It might be one and a bit loads a day, but certainly from the north of Scotland, you'll be lucky if you can even do a load a day.
Yeah.
And if they're to do RDF and things, that'll probably need a license change. Then they're going to SEPA for modifications, and we chatted about SEPA last time in the last episode. If these applications aren't, it's going to take time for sites to get permissions, and the problem they're up against is this is going to be a short-term issue. It's going to be an issue for 2026 and 2027. So are you going to get people investing a lot of money to sort a solution for what's going to be a temporary problem? So
yeah, I guess what is the solution? We move it again.
I'm not totally sure. But I suppose you can't move it again because there's people who invested a lot of money because the ban's coming in place. It's not fair on them that they've done the work. Yeah. So there's councils done the work and there's operators done the work to comply with the ban. So by moving it again, you're actually just making it okay for the people that never complied.
Do you think once it gets on with it, though, once it actually starts it and all that kind of thing, everything will sort of even itself out? Because I think the thing is you can do reports and whatever and all sorts of projections, but until it actually happens, you don't quite know whether your projections are or reality.
I think the only way out of is to continue to allow landfill, but charge an additional fee.
Well, in addition to the landfill tax.
In addition to the landfill tax. So there's a penalty for going over the year.
Yeah.
Who knows? Somebody will tell us, Jane. We'll need to find a guest that knows about this. That's a challenge for 2025, finding a guest that knows about this.
We learn so much, don't we, on this?
Yes.
So can we go back to the limbs in the lock, this homework that you set us?
Oh, the morbid thing. Yes.
Yeah, the one that's on the BBC at the moment, and the fact that you gave us homework to read it, to go and watch these episodes. So give us a bit of a summary again about it, because you were around. I was going to say you were around at the time. Which is quite old, but
I was around.
Yeah, around at the time.
Basically, so William Beggs had basically lifted this poor boy Barry off the street and taken him to his flat and murdered him. He then left the body. He dumped the body at Rowerdennan, the pier at Rowerdennan, which is strange because I used to teach windsurfing at Rowerdennan Youth Hostel, so it's a place I'm quite familiar with. And the only reason the body was found is that's where the police divers train off that pier, and they were doing some training, and they found the limbs. But William Beggs is Irish, so he'd taken the ferry to Ireland, but he dropped the head off the ferry, and it washed up in Troon Beach. So at the time, it was major headline news about what was going on. But I was not involved, but I was at the time the manager of Garlaff landfill site.
So,
and that's if you watch it long enough, you watched it episode 5, then you'll see the scenes from Garlaff landfill site.
Oh, really? So they were on your landfill site searching for this bits of what were they searching for?
Well, they never told us, Jade.
Oh, right. So
they never told us what we were searching for. We were never let into the.
So did they just come onto the landfill site with their sort of, we've got this digger here and we're going to dig here and find something?
No. It was the way we used to work at a bar was when you're on landfill sites, you were never off. You were always working. The site was open Boxing Day. It was open the 2nd of January. So myself and the boss, we used to take turns. One year we'd get Christmas week off. Second year we'd get New Year week off, and we'd rotate it every year. So in this particular year, so this is back in '99, I was due the Christmas week off. So about a day or 2 days before I was due to go off on holiday, this little blue Volkswagen Polo turned up at the site with this man and a woman got out and came in. I could hear him through the next office saying, "Can I, such and such, it was Strathclyde Police at the time, can we talk to the site manager?" And I'm like, "Oh, here we go." So they came into the office, they explained what they were doing. So what they were doing was they were looking for, they thought he'd stripped the flat, they'd removed carpet and wallpaper off the flat, and they knew what date he'd done that, which was back in November or something. So they were looking for waste from that period.
Oh my goodness.
So I sort of explained, well, they sort of came in and they thought, I think they almost thought that, the council had picked up a bin and we'd be able to follow a bin. So the waste went through a transfer station in Kilmarnock, it got bulked up, and then got sent to us. So I think they were almost expecting us to be able to follow a bin, and I was sort of explaining that at that time we were taking like 100 vehicles a day, so we're taking, pretty significant tonnage. And this is going back maybe 40 days or whatever. And I said, look, it's going to be really, really difficult to find where we put this waste, because we don't, the tipping phase moves on and so on. But by pure chance, we'd actually moved tipping location. So the period they were looking at was the period we just started tipping in this new area.
All right.
Otherwise, it would have been real difficult times or whatever. But what we couldn't account for was the council had picked up the waste and then taken it to a transfer station. Now, there's no guarantee if a waste goes into a transfer station, it goes back out the next day. It might sit around for a few days, or it might get pushed to the back or whatever. So there was that bit that was in the middle of it. So anyway, I explained all this to the two detectives and sort of sent them away and thinking they're not going to come back. This is too difficult. And if they do come back, I'm going to be on my holiday anyway, so I'm no caring. So I got back after the Christmas, back in, checked in with my boss, Paul Guzin. I said, were the police out? And he was like, no, never saw them. So I was sitting on Hogmanay, just getting the site shut up for Hogmanay. And this wee blue polo pulls in again. The same two detectives came out.
Oh no! Did it have like flashing
Right,
lights?
We're going to start. No, just total unmarked car. You would never even recognise them. So they turned up and said, we're going to start the searching on the 2nd of January.
Wow.
And I said, well, if you're doing that, it's an active landfill site. We need PPE. We need to induct you. We need to train you, etc., etc. And you had this constant thing of, we're the police, we know what we're doing. I said, well, you've not been in a landfill site. There's gas there. There's this there. There's all sorts of risks. So they obviously needed PPE. So they went to the local Arco shop and got the manager out of his bed. Or he'd closed up for the Hogmanay, so they got him out to open up the shop and get their PPE and so on. And fair play to them, they turned up on the 2nd of January and started searching the site.
Blimey.
And they were there for, I would think they were there for about 3 months.
3 months? Searching the site?
Yep, 3 months.
Did they
searching
kind
the site.
of find anything?
We provided the machine. So we provided the machine, and what we'd do is we'd scrape back a bit of waste. They would search it, scrape back a bit more waste, and they worked in 2 teams. So they did half an hour at a time. And one of the interesting things I thought was at the time they were obviously knew a window of date they were looking for, and because the way waste was degraded, so the newspapers, you couldn't read the date in the newspapers, but the one thing they could date by was the etching on a milk carton. So your Tetra Pak of milk, so all your milk used to be in Tetra Pak in these days, but that was stamped into the Tetra Pak, so that even with it being decayed, it still showed the date. So they could tell they were searching in the right time period, and then the minute they were in the wrong time period, they would change their search location or whatever. So, but they used to leave the site every day with a box of knives.
Oh, really?
And the poor souls at the lab must have. Well, so people throw out kitchen knives, don't they?
And that's what you think they were looking for
over Christmas. Then? I think there was all sorts of stories going around at the time that I'm never totally sure that they'd found all the body. So they'd found the head and they'd found the limbs. I don't think they'd ever found the torso. So I think they were looking for the torso, but that's just speculation on my part. They were looking for the wallpaper he'd stripped, and they were looking for the carpet he'd stripped. But all this time, William Beggs, who they were fairly sure was the killer, had escaped to Holland. And basically what they were
okay.
having to do was build up enough evidence to extradite him from Holland. And he was fighting that extradition. So they were almost trying... eventually one of the sort of detectives said to me, he said, it's almost as important what we don't find at landfill site as what we do find. So they can go back and say, we've searched the site and they never put it there because we've actually searched. But
That's great.
The poor sods, it was,
interesting.
Middle of winter, top of landfill site. It's a pretty foul landfill site in terms of wind and exposure to weather. Where they were searching was pretty odorous. We had a lot of gas at the time, so it was a tough old search for them. But the funniest bit actually was, so they started searching on the 2nd, and I think it was probably 5 or 6 days later, the press turned up.
All right.
And all of a sudden we're like, the phones were going, my mobile was going. I'm fairly convinced that my weighbridge operator at the time had made himself a few quid by giving out reporters my phone number. So I was getting all these phone calls, and we were under sort of strict instructions not to say a word. We were, we were just to say our official line was we're helping Strathclyde Police with their investigation, and that was it. And but the reporters turned up on site en masse and then disappeared just as quickly as they disappeared.
Well, I suppose you want to be sitting around the newspaper site. Yeah.
Well, the newspaper headline was funny the next day, because police have swooped in this site in Ayrshire. The police hadn't swooped; they'd been there for the last 7 or 8 days. But according to the headline, they swooped to the site. So
my question there actually asks is, who plays you in the programme? I mean, is there anybody that, anybody famous,
No. I was a bit disappointed. The waste management bit, obviously never, I never knew if they'd found anything, but in the programme that come out, that the search at the landfill never brought up any evidence. So they obviously never found anything at the landfill. So all you see in the programme is some shots of the landfill site and the search team working.
Oh, right. So you're not there. They didn't interview you or anything. No.
So I'm not there. I'm not there. Okay. I never even got a part.
Oh, that's a shame. Oh well, right. Okay.
I remember. I was going to say, I remember the first day was I had to go in and brief them in terms of the landfill and the rest of the landfill site, and so I did that part, and then I was just hanging about, and then one of them quite firmly told me I had to leave.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because they were obviously going to start talking about confidential stuff.
Oh, you could have had like a little sort of glass at the door or something. Yeah. Okay, well,
but
interesting.
There you go. So that's why the poor soul that's trying to find his hard drive with his bitcoins is going to have a really hard time, because it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
And that was police putting a lot of resource into trying to. Yeah. So there you go. So are we nostalgia trip? It was actually weird for me. It was weird watching the programme because it was Rardenne, and that was quite familiar to it. And then there was a bit about the landfill site. I actually don't know how I managed at the time, because my son was born in February that year, so I'm not quite sure how I managed to run 2 landfill sites and make sure the police search team were looked after and all the rest while all that was going on in my life. But you forget these things.
Yeah. It's just a moment in life. You move on, you get over it.
Yeah, there we go. So for another history lesson, well, no, it's not a history lesson, but a trip down nostalgia lane, our interview with John Crawford, who started working in deepest, darkest Ayrshire, many, many years ago. And he runs through his career journey and his approach to waste management in the following episode with myself and Jane. And just finally, before we finish up, wishing all our listeners a Happy New Year. And this is our 3rd year of Rubbish Talk. Please help us by sharing, liking, commenting, and all the rest. Anything else, Jane?
No, I don't think so. Just on to John and his history.
Thank you very much.
Hi, John. Welcome to Rubbish Talk. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Nice to see the two of you.
You too, John. You too.
Good. Well, yes, it is lovely to see you, because my first question is usually, who do you currently work for? But, obviously you're retired, so you've got your feet up,
Yes.
take out the bins once a week.
That's
Is
that.
there anything else
Yeah.
you're doing in the world of waste at the moment?
Well, I've been occasionally try and get the message across through the Herald letters, just about when I see some of the nonsense that's going on, and nobody ever replies, or nobody ever comes back and says anything. So either nobody's reading it or nobody cares. So there's that. And I say I do a column, a pro bono column for a technical journal, which is 500 words a month, and any topic that I'm allowed to choose. And
Oh, crikey. So what was your last topic?
that's a good question. Hang on. Trying to think. I did one about the changes in refuse collection when I started working. That was one before that, when we started off with galvanised bins, and then we moved on to the sacks, paper sacks, and then we moved on to the wheelie bins, and then we moved on to curbside collections. Oh, I've just found that the last one I did was actually about the BBC story where they had found a live tortoise in a picking belt and a NMRF, and I managed to. I thought it was actually a good idea, because they showed you what happens to refuse, picking belts, how the countries are removed and stuff like that. They didn't actually explain how a tortoise managed to get into somebody's recycling bin, which I think even in the tortoise and the hare scenario, there's no way a tortoise gets itself into a 240 litre bin, or even a black box at the side of the curb. So that was that one. And I say the one before was that about how things have changed, and the more we change, we're still getting the same complaints with people who think that their rubbish is somewhat different from everybody else's, and it should be a special case. A bin's not going to last us a fortnight. We're all big eaters. Or the grandchildren come for their tea 5 nights a week after school. So, we've changed. We keep changing, but that's where I'm at just now. I say, I'm not really bothered, and if nobody listens, I feel better. It gets them off my chest.
Yeah, no, that's good, because you've seen a lot of changes in your career, haven't you? You've worked in quite a wide range of organisations.
Yeah.
I can't believe, Jane, you've not asked if the tortoise survived.
Well, I was going to ask
to know if this tortoise survived or not.
I know. Well, to be honest, we used to enjoy the series Drop the Dead Donkey, so I headed this article, Drop the Live Tortoise. And it was actually, the story was good, because a lot of people think it's magic. It goes into the back of a refuse vehicle, and, there's magicians go abracadabra, and it gets sorted out. There's no idea what happens to the waste after that. The other sad thing was that the week before, the BBC had run an article about an MRF, and all the people are in, and it was an EFW plant, and they were all running about shouting reasons why we don't want this, we don't want that. And nobody seems to have understand why we have had to go towards curbside recycling or EFW plants. And as I say, you could argue it's all down to John Major, who I think was conned into signing up for the EU EC directive in landfills when they were all tired after Maastricht. But having said that, it's there, we should be building on it. Instead of that, we spent a lot of time 20 years ago getting the curbside going, getting recycling up to 45%, and here we are all these years later. It's not any better. So that's the realities of it. There doesn't seem to be any pragmatism.
We'll be asking you about your magic wand later, John, and how you would change the world of waste.
That's amused. Right. So that's that. That's what I'm doing just now. As I say, I'm trying to keep out of trouble.
Really?
Trying not to bore people, but well, you see, you get to when you stop work, you get to an age where it dawns on you, you become a bore, telling complete strangers about how you used to get out of town and get drunk, and things like why VAR is destroying football. I've been following football since the early 60s, And now I've got to the stage where Gino says there's a game on tonight, and I say, I'm not watching that, I'm fed up with VAR. It should be 90 minutes, finished. Instead of that now, it's 10 minutes of added VAR time. It's a more. Anyway, enough.
Okay, fair enough. I'll leave the next one over to Alistair then.
Well, I was going to, before we go on to the next question, John, maybe give listeners a wee potted history of your background, where you started.
All right.
If that would be good.
Well, I don't know where you really start. I'm my father's side of the family were all farm servants, tenant farmers, ploughmen, horsemen. And my father was made redundant in 1957, and he started doing agricultural contracting and eventually ended up working for the council. So basically from about the age of 8 or 9 or 10, I was involved with his business. Taught me to drive the car when I was 10, and I was driving a tractor when I was 9, so I was used to being about machinery. Because I was, I'll not be surprised, I was a class clown at school, and I never got enough hires to get into university in 1967, so I started a full-time course in quantity surveying at the Glasgow College of Building and Printing. And at the time, I just didn't take to it, and I was fed up. And I saw this advert in the Dross and Salkits Herald for a student sanitary inspector in the Borough Surveyor's office in Salkits. So I hadn't a clue what they did, so I just said, I'll apply for it. And when I got in, the previous guy that was leaving says, you're the only candidate, you've got the job. And I says, oh, right, okay. So I went in and I met this big guy called William Tulloch, who was the Borough Surveyor. And he says, why are you not going to university? And I says, well, at the time I didn't have enough hires. He says, oh, you should be going. I said, I don't want to go to university, I want a job. So he says, well, if you want a job, you can start. But he says, if you're my boy, I'd be saying, no, you're going to university. And what I didn't realise was that the Borough Surveyor's office was an Aladdin's cave for somebody like me, because although you and I are both qualified EHOs, Alistair, the Borough Surveyors, the actual public health part in the Borough Surveyor's office was very small. He was in charge of waste management, roads, sewers, street lighting, coastal protection, building control, condemning unfit houses, upgrading unfit houses, overseeing the development of new council houses. And I say, for somebody like me, I just took to like a duck to water. The county council did all the likes of the farms and the dairies and the inspecting the shops. And with no disrespect to EHOs that do that, that just wasn't for me. So as I say, I couldn't get into the job and learn enough about it. The downside was that if I'd been there a year and the Borough Surveyor says, look, with what we're doing here, he says that the basic sanitary qualification isn't enough. He says, you'll need to get a building qualification. So I went to night school 3 nights a week to get an ONC in building. And then I just built on it and top it after that. So that was that. I qualified in 72. I persuaded him to let me go for it was the Old Institute of Public Cleansing course, which in those days was a very valued qualification. It was so difficult to get in. First of all, you weren't allowed to apply to be a student until you'd done 5 years practical work in a cleansing department. You then had to ask them for permission if you could sit their exams. And then after you got that permission, you then to wait till there was an exam diet announced and then ask for permission to go and sit it then. And it was, at that time, I know it's totally different now, but it was such a valued qualification to have. So I did that then, and I also went and got an HNC in building. So, and then I ended up, as you know, going to Strathclyde as an undergraduate, again to the 3rd year there, and eventually emerged as I wasn't actually everything. In 1977, I come back and the director sent for me, to congratulate you, well done, you've got your degree, what are you doing now? And I says, well, I'm hoping you're going to promote me, because this is the 2 that went through last year, you promoted them. And I says, he says, well, you're not getting promoted. And I says, why? He says, you don't have a meat inspection ticket. I says, what? I says, look, I'm a qualified sanitary inspector. I've got an HNC in building. I've got the public cleansing qualifications as recognised as an HNC. I says, I've now got a very good university degree. And I says, he says, look, son, he says, I need qualified EHOs to stand in for the meat inspectors at the Saltcoats Abattoir. And I says, you're not going to pay, I'm not going to stand in a line with a sharp knife cutting carcasses to look for disease. So he says, well, son, you're going nowhere in this business without a meat ticket. So that was the end of the conversation. So I come back and I says to Jean, I says, I'll stick it out. And that I was stuck doing inspecting shops and inspecting pubs and clubs. Some of the pubs I used to drink in, and I was getting to the stage I couldn't get in to do a pub inspection, but all the locals are shouting, get out, hit him out here, he's a disgrace, how dare you come in here, this is a great clean boozer and that. And some of the farms, my father was actually getting pelters with some of the farmers who said, is this no your boy that's coming in here and telling us how to clean up our buyers and stuff like this? So, in the march of you fed up, Jane, right?
No, I was just thinking. I was just thinking about
history things.
Right.
I was just thinking about
okay, I'll keep going.
farmers.
It's up to you to tell me to shut up. You'll not offend me if I tell me to shut up.
No,
Anyway.
I think it's fascinating. I think
So,
it's brilliant.
I saw this advert in the paper for it just said Waste Management Glasgow. I went up and I met this guy. He still might be around, so I'm not going to name him. But he'd been the Glasgow manager. He was from a sales background with PDB Waste, and he introduced, we had a good talk. And he says, right, you'll need to go down to the chief executive of Meat Waste Division, which is all part of the PD. People remember PD as the PD engineering that built the bin motors, but there was also PD Beat Waste, PD Industrial Services, and they did a lot of work. They were out in Lagos and they were in America as well. I actually did some work with a firm that was owned by the mafia, but that's another story. Anyway, he says, right, you need to come down and meet Alistair Ferguson. I didn't know Alistair had been the chief sanitary inspector in the borough of Gourock before he went to the private sector. So goes down to Nottingham gets shown in, and this wee guy's sitting there dead severe. So he says, well, why have you applied for this job? And I says, well, it's a challenge. And he shouts, a challenge? I'm not here to provide challenges for people. I'm here to make profits for the shareholders of this company. And he just badgered me. So I go back up the road and I says to Jean, look, I'm going to be trudging around farms and pubs and shops with a notebook for the rest of my life. So 2 nights later, this guy phoned me. He says, you've got the job. I says, don't want it. I says, I'm not wanting for a wee guy like that. He says, look, there's a lot of animosity in the private sector about people who have come up through local government. And he says, he's made the changes. He says, and he wasn't sure about you. So he said, that's why he went for you. He says, well, he thinks you're good, so could you come? And I went, aye, okay. So they had this long history, PD Beat Waste, of the original company was Paul Dufferin, and they had built railway wagons for the railway companies in the 19th century. And then they'd got into waste. They'd actually got, the PD Engineering had the licence in this UK for the dumpster corporations. So they built the likes of the Shepherd Milers, the Dinosaurs, the wee roll-on offs at the time, and the front end loaders, which were called dump masters. So that was great. So about after 12 weeks, I get told this day, you have to come down to Nottingham tomorrow morning and be here for 10 o'clock. And I, okay. So he goes way down and he says, right, the company, the Beat Waste Division and Industrial Services have been sold to a consortium, which is owned by 60% George Wimpy, the construction people worldwide, and 40% of D&H Holdings, which is a South African waste management company. And that was it. So the message was that they expected the Conservatives to win the forthcoming election, and the Conservatives were expected to privatise local authority waste management. And these guys, Wimpy had the brand, the yellow trucks and the depots and everything. These guys had the expertise, or so we're meant to believe. When we saw their training films for South Africa, you saw a bin motor going down the street with a white driver, and there was these, and this is not funny, there was these coloured loaders in shorts and simmets running after this bin motor, flinging bags of rubbish. And they were like Mo Farah standards of fitness to there. And when I saw this, They said, this is the future of waste management in the refuse collection in the UK. I says, no, it's no. There is no way that is ever going to work here. You boys are on the wrong track altogether. And I says, there are efficiencies to be gained in the public sector, but that's not how you're going to do it. You're not going to win contracts like that. So to cut a long story short, after 9 months, D&H sold their share to Wimpy, and they cleared back to South Africa, which was, I mean, I know apartheid's gone now, but there were some dreadful people. They weren't nice people to like work with. You know, you've worked with people and then you went for a drink or a meal after. No, these guys, I couldn't be bored with them. So that was it. Mm-hmm. So Wimpy then had a great policy that they loved to use ex-services people. There was ex-Navy people and ex-Army and so they decided that they would bring in a new sales manager for Scotland who was actually been an Army staff captain, and after he'd left the Army he'd worked for Maynards of Wine Gums fame. So the first day he walked in and he introduced himself.
He worked for who, Job?
Sorry?
Wine Gums?
Maynards of Wine Gums.
I know what you mean.
That's what I thought you said. Yeah, I was like, wine gums. Okay.
Aye, liquor of all sorts and wine gums. So anyway, so he comes in the first day, he says, he's heard a lot about you. I says, I hope it's all good. He says, well, you're short in managerial skills, he says, and I'm going to teach you lateral thinking. And I went, okay. So that's fine. I said, I don't know what that means. So then he says, anyway, he says, I need to compliment you. And I says, how's that? He says, I've just been looking around your trucks. He says, and I can't understand why your exhaust systems are so shiny. And I says, go and point one out to me. And I says, well, actually, that's the air intake for the engine. The exhaust system's that big, rusty, clatty thing in the bottom. So when things started going down the hill, I'd had arguments with them. In 1979, they wanted to buy W.H. Malcolm's tidy site business, which was actually double the amount of trucks we were running. And at the time, I told my immediate boss, you do not, I said, we know Mr. Malcolm. The late Donald was a guy. He was actually, one of his sisters-in-law was married to a cousin of my father's. And my father had met him a couple of times. He says, he's a wonderful guy, but he says it's very difficult to deal with. So I said to him, look, if Donald's selling tidy site, we don't want it. So and they said, oh, he's got a front-end loader. I says, I know, but I says, I've been taking business off of for the last 6 months. And I says, and it's no, I says, if you give me another 3 months, I'll have all his business off him. I says, he's also into a skip business that we're not. We had skip customers that we went and we saw maybe once or twice a week. They phoned in and they said, we've got a skip ready. I says, he's supporting the tenemental renovations in East End of Glasgow. I says, at 10 o'clock in the morning, they can get a call for somebody saying, I'm wanting a dozen skips into Duke Street by 2 o'clock. Now, we can't do that. So eventually, it nearly sunk the company and there was all sorts of repercussions. So we ended up one day with my new salesman, our new boss, and him and I had a wee argument about he says, we're going to be in London on Monday morning for a meeting. And I says, Monday morning is the September weekend, the depot's closed. We're on holiday. He says, no, you're not. It's not in the company diary. I says, I know, but this is a Glasgow holiday. I says, and I'm not going. And I says, because my mother's quite seriously ill in the hospital. And I says, my sister and I and my father are taking turns to go and sit with her. I says, so on Sunday night, I've promised to go and see my mother. And he says, I says, well, if you want, I'll come down on the Monday morning. And he says, no. So he went to come through and put a memo on my desk. This is a formal instruction. You will be at Glasgow Airport at 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon. So I looked at it and the choice was there. I'm going to go through and grab him by the throat or I'll wait till 5 o'clock. And I thought about it and I says, this is not going to work. So I went back and I says to Jean, look, I says, I'd been for an interview for the university as a lecturer's job and it was been offered. And I wasn't really sure if I was cut out to lecture people because well, you know what I'm like. So she says, look, and I says, also, it's giving up the company car, it's giving up the expenses. And she says, I know. She says, but you're working a 65 to 70 hour week just now. She says, at least with university, you're going to be 95. So I says, all right. So we're in the next morning and I says to him, there's my resignation. And he says, that's fine, thanks. Okay. So I phoned Jean and she says, what did he say? I said, just said thanks. So he come back through about 11 o'clock and he says, I've been on to HQ and he says, they're thinking about giving you a depot south of the border. I says, I don't want a depot south. I've got the Glasgow operation, I've got the Dundee operation. I says, I've worked it here, I know how here. I don't want to go to Walsall, I don't want to go to Radcliffe or somewhere like that. So he says, if that's the case, then he says, you've got to 2 o'clock, he says, to get your desk cleared and get out of here. He says, you can take the company car. And I says, hold on a minute, Jack. I says, look, I says, we've got a lot of customers, we've been big customers that we're nearly getting. I says, I could spend the next 2 or 3 weeks just going round and building it. And he says, no, get off the premises. He says, you can keep the company car to the end of your 4 weeks' notice, but he says, you'll need to pay for any petrol that you use for it. I says, aye, okay, fine. So that was it. So that's how Wimpy and I parted company. Went to university, did my 4 years there, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Did a bit of consultancy work. Paul, he's now emeritus professor Paul Smith, and I wrote we wrote the landfill technology book, and then
that was one of the first landfill books I read, John.
Was that? Well,
there you go.
That was all based in lectures to undergraduates. And so then I saw this job advertised as a deputy in Renfrew, Deputy Director of Cleansing. No, I had known Stan from we had a landfill in a truck and 3 trucks at Dundee. So I'd only met him the once, and it was to try and get rid of rubbish that was coming out of Shetlands, which we might have time to talk about later on. And anyway, I had known him, but I didn't know them now. We'd also spoken at the AIR conference when Bill Lewis became the president. So we knew each other and had good respect for each other. So I deliberately, as soon as I applied for it, I never got in touch with him because it's no fair. I don't really want him to say, no, he's a pal of Stan Daggs or the dum. So eventually got in, and I seem to get the poorest interviews. So 2 o'clock interview, so 25 to 3, I'm still waiting. So what's going on here? So get shown into this wee room. There must have been about 18 people all sat round this table and one chair at the bottom. And I could see Stan away at the top. He says, right, Mr. Crawford, he says, before that starts, he says, we see from your CV you've been doing consultancy. And I went, aye. He says, if you get this job, are you going to carry on doing consultancy? And I said, certainly no. This is a chief officer's job. And he went, right, Chairman. He says, this mean can start. And I went, you little git. And I was going to, I lost the places. You might have bloody warned me, Stan. We've supped a few pints together. No. So anyway, so I just barked off the answers and this and that to Dad-a-dum. And then eventually, by the time I got control of myself, I thought, this is... And it was our wedding anniversary that night, and I says to Jean, I says, I've blown this. I says, she says, oh, look, you've got a good job at university. You've just got tenure. She says, don't worry about it. She says, it's not really a big issue. So I think the next afternoon, Stan phones. He says, do you want the job? I says, aye, of course. But I says, what was all that about? He says, well, he says, there's a clique runs this council, and he says, they didn't want an outsider to get it. They wanted somebody who was, he says, who actually worked for you. And he says, so they told, he says, this council has a policy, they will not employ consultants for anything. And he says, the fact that you were doing consultants, if you'd have said, he says, so they spent half an hour argument, when we ask him the consultant the questions, Stan says, ask him at the start. If he says he's going to do consultancy, that's that finish. But they wouldn't do it. So anyway, so that was me. That's how I got started in Renfrew. So then I was offered the Hamilton job as well, and it was another one where it was a full council, and I got shown into this room. They're all sitting there, and a sheet of paper, blank sheet of paper in front of me. So the provost says, he says, I want you to turn it over. He says, and there's 20 questions there. He says, we want you to answer every question. You don't need to answer them from 1 to 20, but you have to answer every question. I'm going, God almighty. You might say 22 strangers all looking at you, and the only person I knew was Alistair Baird, because he was the chief executive by then. So finally, so that was it. Got the job. Then what happens, this is going on too long, innit? Went to, the restructured in Hamilton in there was a new load of councillors come in 1992, And that was the start of the generation of councillors who wanted to be saluted and respected, and they didn't appreciate somebody giving them objective advice. They took it as a personal insult. So all our jobs all disappeared. Alistair had actually been disciplined, and it was so sad because it was an end to a terrible end to a good career. Alistair had actually retired, and then I went up to Inverness and got the job there. And then after that I went to East Ayrshire, and as I moved, when I got to East Ayrshire, I had more than just the cleansing and environmental health. I had civic government licensing, trading standards, and emergency planning as well. So that's where it's all been. And then a council that brought, we have no compulsory redundancies. I was brought in at the end of 2006 with the chief executive. She says, we're making you redundant. And I says, what happened to the no compulsory redundancy policy? She says, oh, it's different for chief officers. So that was that. I went, okay. So I then went self-employed, as you know, and you kindly came up one night and we had a pint in the Osprey, and you told me about all the pros and cons I've been running. And so I went self-employed until 2010, when Jim's, who was, shall we say, my main customer, Jim's CEC collapsed and the money was handed over to Centrally. So, and that was it. So that, no, I don't know where this all went.
There you go, John. I think that is probably our longest ever answer to the first question.
I think he's, to be fair, I think he's probably covered the second one as well.
No, I think he's covered a few. I think you've covered a few actually there, John. But I think this is fascinating. Like, I knew you from East Ayrshire. That's the first time I met you. I think was East Ayrshire when I was a bar.
No, I knew before that. I remember. Were you with Shanks at that?
Well, I was with Shanks.
I remember you. You don't remember me, but I remember you, because one of the things I was going to say later, I was hoping to say, was that every now and again you see somebody and you say to yourself, he or she is going to do. I'll be very surprised if he or she doesn't do well in this business. And as I say, that's so, without making your head too big, but that's,
there you go. Thank you, John.
I'd clock you then.
I'll take that one. So I think that's this. You've certainly answered the normal question about what brought you into the world of waste management. We've covered that one. What's been your favourite? What's been your favourite job? What one brings back the sort of happiest memories of that was great when I was doing that?
It's hard to say, because when I went to Salkits, one of the first jobs was to develop new routes for they just bought a mechanical street sweeper. They'd never had one before, so we had to develop all the routes for the street sweeper to go, and that was like prioritise like the routes where the school buses were on when the school terms were in, town centre every day, the shopping centres, the wee shopping centres and the schemes when there was there. So there was that. There was also introducing a garden refuse service, which was another, and also introducing a bulky uplift service, which, believe it or not, in 1968-69 was nearly that common throughout Scotland. So that was a big thing there. And Wimpy Waste, I think the biggest achievement was managing to integrate the W.H. Malcolm tidy site business into our own. And it's actually an overstatement to say it, because within something like 3 months, about 2/3 of the Malcolm business had gone. It had gone because we couldn't get 15 skips to Duke Street by 2 o'clock today. It wasn't feasible. Mm-hmm. There was also, the company wouldn't listen to the fact that Donald Malcolm was such a big personality in industry that a lot of operators were scared actually to bid against Malcolm customers. But when it was Wimpy Waste, we're getting guys that never. They started saying, "Oh, it's only Wimpy Waste." Whereas on Donald's day, Donald would have phoned up and say, "Hey, what are you up to? That's behave yourself." And that's the polite version, okay?
Send the boys round.
So that was that. Aye. In university, I would think the achievements were so many that the undergraduates I taught I went on to do so well. And Colin Clark was in the first class I ever taught, and there's a whole, it's not fair maybe to single out Colin because there's a whole lot more of them, but they've all gone in, done well for themselves. And Renfrew, the big problem was sorting out a transport operation that was an utter nightmare, simply because the only answer I'll give you is we had I ran a fleet of 250 trucks. The tyre bill was 90 grand a year, and nobody could produce a contract and show me why the local tyre company had got the contract. And all they said is, oh, we've been doing it for years and you get the best deal. And I said, well, why are you taking we get a new truck come in and it goes across to your depot and you take the new trucks, new tyres off it and you put on retreads, remolds. And they said, oh, because you're running landfills. I says, no, we don't. We've got an incinerator. We're running in hard ground. See, so that was it. We put it out to tender. There was all sorts of pressure came and stand for the elected members. Do you realise what you're doing? And we put it out to tender. And the first bid we got we valuated it at 32,000. Right, and
that's a big change.
Exactly, and the first
yeah.
year we ran it cost us actually 36,000. Now that was the sort of things we were doing. We had horrible VOR. We had vehicles off the road. We had a collective agreement with it, but the AEUW refused to get involved in it. So you had all this hassle with the mechanics trade union all the time. Whenever you tried to bring in innovation or get them to change things like that, I mean, it was it was just a nightmare. But Hamilton's a different ballgame. Alistair Baird had left it run like a Rolls Royce. The late John Hemsley and Bill Tate had the cleansing. Arthur Barnes had it going great. Scott Campbell was running environmental health like a watch. There was more time to look at the policy things, and rather than not getting your hands. I mean, in the entry days, for example, I used to wander in the yard and poke my nose into open doors and to find out what was going on. Didn't need to do that at Hamilton. Inverness was exactly the same. Ian Williams was actually the deputy, should have been given the job when I got it. He was far more experienced and far better operator than me. In East Ayrshire, it was just a case of trying to integrate and come to terms with the fact of I was in a head office where councillors could open your door, and for some of the Cumnock and Doon Valley councillors, F&C at you. And they only did it once because I just F&C'd back, told them to go away. You know, but that was, there was, the big thing there was getting the curbside collection system really going, because when they unified the original thing in 96, people could put a dustbin and 6 items of side waste. Now, the 6 items could be a bed, a wardrobe, 3 bags of garden rubbish, and maybe an ironing board. And, it was like bring out your dead collection. So, and we'd then to go to one-wheeled bin a fortnight with the lid closed. So that took a bit of carrying on, but there was a good team there. I personally didn't have the same hands-on. I stood back with Paul Todd, and what we did was we said, we will be the auditors in this. You come up with ideas, and then we're going to try and pick holes in it. And that's what we did. We said, how are you going to do with this? Somebody who says, somebody phones up every week for a special uplift, we'll just limit special uplifts to 6 a year. So we just took our time and worked through it. So there's not been anything really individually I could say was terrific, but collectively there's been a lot of pride in it.
Yeah.
What about any funny What about any funny stories, John? Have you got any funny stories?
Well, I went for the disaster.
Okay.
Well, here's one for the disaster book, right? Which is, you might find funny, you might know it. When we took on, we acquired the Malcolm Tidy site, we to take on extra staff. Malcolm's trucks came with a driver, but we to take on an extra salesman and we take on extra office staff, because obviously we had 500 containers and Malcolm had 5, so we went for 1,000 containers and also a whole load of more customers. So anyway, the sales reps shouldn't be about your fee all that much in the depot. You should maybe come in once a week and just tell you if they want to see you. But if they don't need to see you, fine. So anyway, company sales manager comes up and we bring in the new sales rep. So after he goes out of the room, I went and opened the window and the sales manager says, that's not me. And I said, it's not me. And he says, this guy's got a problem, personal hygiene. I says, I know. He says, well, you need to speak to him. So he says, I wouldn't buy any service off a guy like this. If that guy came into my office, I wouldn't buy. I says, well, I'm continually harming him, saying you need to have a clean car when you go into somebody's depot. So anyway, so how are you going to do this? So I thought, right, you know it. And I put, dear, I'll no name his name. It would appear you have a problem with personal hygiene. I think the best thing is for you to go home, get yourself cleaned up, and as long as it doesn't happen again, there's no need for you and ever to discuss this again. So 10 minutes later, I just put it in his desk. 10 minutes later, he shot out the depot and away, come back an hour and a half later, showered, shaved, all clean. And that was it. No problem. So fine. 3 weeks later, my secretary comes in and she says to me, there's a problem in the general office. I says, how? She says, it's one of the new girls. I says, oh, what's going on? She says, she's bouffing. I says, what do you mean bouffing? She says, she's honking. She says, and the girls are all complaining about the smell of her. And I says, well, women are better at being upfront with people than men? She says, well, to be honest, she says, we don't know her that well. And anyway, she kind of hints that her husband's a bit of a kind of tough guy. So I said, all right, okay. So then I know how to solve this. I'll do the same approach again. So I writes out the same wee letter, took it through, and I says, look, there's a wee note for you. So she reads it. She bursts into floods of tears, grabs her handbag and her coat and rushes out the front door. So the accountant comes through and he says to me, what's up with her? I says, I don't know. He says, oh, I'm going to go. I says, look, don't go after her, just leave it. So about an hour and a half later, phone goes, is that Mr. Crawford? Aye. He says, who's this? He says, I'm just wanting to make sure you're in the office. He says, because I'm coming down to kick your effing teeth in. I says, who's this? And he says, I'm such and such his husband. He says, I've had to come home from my work because she's in hysterics here about a letter you gave her. And he says, and I'm not having it. And I says, look, pal, I says, I'm only a messenger. I says, the girls that she works with have complained about her. I says, now, did you want me to bring her into the office and speak to her and embarrass her? And he says, well, how could they not speak to her? I says, I don't know. He says, well, he says, we've never had this problem before. He says, we've got an appointment on with the family doctor. And I says, well, I hope it goes well and you can get some advice. Right? He says, I says, oh, by the way, I says, I've got meetings up to 3:30, but I says, if you're still coming down to see me, I'll be in the office to 6 o'clock tonight. And he threw the phone down. So, she never come back, and I never heard from them before. So that really is the biggest disaster thing. I worked somewhere else after that, and I had another colleague with the same problem, and I took the easy way. I just opened the window and had a can of air freshener in my office and just sprayed air spray. I just said, I'm not going to do this road again. I don't need this.
Think of the HR issues nowadays you would have dealing with things like that. So do you think, John, obviously you've spent your life in the waste sector, have your opinions and habits out with the workplace changed during that time? Have you always been quite, just in terms of how waste is managed and how we should engage with the public? Do you think you've changed your views?
No, I've always felt that prosecution should be the last resort. When the Daily Mail made a lot of money out of telling people the bin police will be coming around and be doing this, and when we put in the curbside recollection, if the boys found, say, a brown bin with general rubbish in it, they would leave it, and we had a couple of people that would come out and explain to the people, this is how, what you should be putting in this bin. If they say things like, oh, my black bin's full, they say, well, let's bring your black bin out and let's, see if there's stuff in there you could maybe have recycled, or stuff you could maybe have collapsed or, washed down. So, and if they keep doing it after that, you say, well, look, pal, I'm sorry, that needs to be dealt with. But I think there's far too much running around and bean counting as well. And I guess, I remember I represented CIWM with Audit Scotland when they wanted a performance indicator for bin collections. And I said to the guy, I says, why? He says, well, we want to know how many bins are getting missed. I says, well, here's the bottom line. I says, if I don't sweep your street for 3 weeks, I says, you're not really bothered about phoning the council unless it's really manky. I says, if I don't empty your bin today, the first thing you do is you phone the council. Now it says, if you're cute, you say to the council, as I'm telling you now, our crews were all radioing in saying, look, there's no bin outside the Meldrum house this morning. And within 10 minutes, somebody from the Meldrum house phones in and says, the bin men didn't empty my bin. And they say, well, we had a report 10 minutes ago, your bin wasn't out. And they said, all right, okay, keys I'm caught. We slept in or I forgot. And I would just send the crew back. It's when the guy says, my bin was out, and I know a councillor, and I say, I know them all. So that's not going to impress me, pal. But there's this nonsense about running round, and they do these missed bin collections, and it tells you nothing. It's a total waste of time. And also, I'm really disappointed that sadly everything that we forecast, the Environmental Health Scotland forecast in 1993 has come to bear with SEPA, and to a lesser extent the Environment Agency, where there was a nonsense a year ago where they were saying things like environmental agency officers have been told to stay away from the bad sites during the month of December because it'll affect their performance visits. And to me that's shocking. You shouldn't be measuring. There's some sites, as you know, Alistair, you can go to them once a fortnight and they'll be pristine and perfect because the people care. There's other sites, you could be on them every day, and they're the ones that are going to take more of your time. But simply saying because of this and because of that is, you haven't done enough inspections, you've done too many inspections, I don't agree with that.
No, absolutely.
I don't think I've changed my views. I think prosecution should be less. I still, obviously, the fly tippers and the litter droppers and the dog foulers, the only way you're going to cure them is by fly. But it's not just enough just to do the notice. I think we're not doing enough about social media, which I've hand in my heart. I don't do social media, but we need to put names and addresses and who was caught, where and when. And I've also felt that litter patrols and dog patrols are like speed traps. If you put a speed trap up, within quarter of an hour, everybody's flashing their lights and everybody slows down and they stop speeding. If word gets about, look, they're out booking people for dropping litter and their dog's crapping in a public place, maybe they'll clean up after their dog, maybe they'll clean up, and maybe they'll stop dropping litter. It's got the same effect. So I think it's a fine line between what we should be going. The education thing, you've touched a nerve there. I'm old enough to remember when Keep Scotland Beautiful was basically Big Douglas Wright with his 10 kilts and Big May, who were a great company, and they did more to publicise Keep Thing. I understand Keep Scotland Beautiful's got 100 employees now. They are paying they're paying a consultant to ask them why people drop litter. If they go and ask any street sweeper why people drop litter, they'll tell them they drop litter because they can get away with it. We're not catching them. It's just
absolutely, John.
Why it doesn't need 100 people to go out and tell you why people drop litter. That's really what gets up my nose.
Yeah. Right. So, how you're obviously retired now, John. How do you pass the time apart from pulling your bins in and writing for the Skip magazine?
I've been into amateur genealogy for nearly 40 years, and one of my great grandfathers lost his tenant farm in Butte because after the 1866 election, he was known to have not voted for the Marquess candidate, and he voted for a Liberal candidate. And those were the days where, when you went into the polling station, the candidates or the representatives you had to declare. You weren't allowed. There wasn't secret ballots. And at that time, all the farmers had been told, anybody who votes for I'll maybe actually send you, Alistair, I'll send you a wee paper I did on it. If you don't vote for the Marquess's candidate, you could lose your farm. And that's what they didn't do it right away. They waited a year, and then his tenancy was closed, and that's how they come back to Ayrshire. So there's stuff like that. But I'm now at the stage where, as as new additions join a very extended family, I can, like, if they're interested, I can give them wee stories about where they've come from and who their antecedents were. And I mean, there's no great links with noble houses or stuff like that.
Oh, that's a shame. I was hoping for a good story there,
No,
John.
There's another famous, not so funny. I remember when we went up to Ardeer when the composting contract was there. And if you, I don't know if it's still going there, but we went up, we're treading all around it. And I says to Moran, Templeton, I said, look, do you realise we could be walking over bits of my great-great-great-grandfather? She says, how do you know? I says, because he was blown to bits here in an explosion. And he worked in the dynamite. And they used to work in these wee square buildings, and the roofs weren't tied in, so that if there was an explosion in the black powder, it just blew the roof off. It blew them to smithereens, but it meant it's just to put a roof back on. So anyway, Matthew Garrett was blown to bits, and they collected up what they could of him, and it was put into the church, and his widow went up and she demanded that they open the coffin so that she could make sure that his bits were where his feet would have been, and that was handed down the family. They said the smell was appalling. It was a roasting June day, and she wouldn't have let them go in with the serenity. It's full of stuff like that. It's great fun. Spent hours. Also, as you know, I've followed the Leeds side for since 1964, and I had hoped to live long enough to see them win the Scottish Junior Cup again, but sadly I'll settle for them getting back up into the West of Scotland Premier Division.
You followed what, sorry?
I forgot about that. John is an avid follower of Ayrshire football, which is renowned around the world, I think, for
the juniors.
The junior football being...
Yeah. Well, I think the best word is towsy. When the first year of East Ayrshire Council, they awarded an East Ayrshire Cup, and the final, of course, would you expect was it played at Townhead Park, home of Comnock Juniors, and the visitors was Auchinleck Talbot, who through mining communities coming for the Fife just after the Second World War, they hated each other with a passion, and it was so bad that William Stafford took my advice, and I says, look, you can't present this trophy out in the park. What we'll do is, Bill and I stood at the bottom of the stairs to the clubhouse, and the provost stood up at the top with the club to hand out the medals and the cup. And Bill and I just stood there and said, who are you? I'm a committee. No, you're no. You're not getting up. And okay if you had a strip on and boots, you were a player, but I mean, the amount of... They got to the stage, actually, the local police superintendent and inspector used to call them in and say, look, if there's any problem with here, I'm going to start arresting players, because it's you're inciting this trouble in the thing, miss.
Well, I'm going to move on to about a fact you want to share from your job or sector, which you think people might not know. Is there any specific bit of slang, given that you've moved around quite a bit, John? I would have thought there'd be quite some sort of different terminology.
I think I'm right. I think I'm definitely the only lecturer in the Department of Civil Engineering at Strathclyde that had a Highway Goods Street driving licence. I had an HGV driving licence from 1972 to 2000, and I gave it up because I hadn't access to trucks by then. 2000, I think it was 2008. But I went and sat the test and kept it. It was originally Class 2 because it was Class 3 because we had only 2-axle trucks in sockets, but it was upgraded to a 3-axle truck and when I went to Inverness. So that's about the only thing I can think. I think everybody else knows.
There we go.
That's fair enough.
Their thing as well is nobody will know this. I've been an aficionado of English Test cricket for many, many years. I'm of the genre that used to enjoy putting the Test match on BBC Two and turning the sound down and listening to Test match special on the radio. I've followed them since the days of Fred Truman was a Test match special and mowing the face off everybody, but I don't go for this fancy cricket now with this. I don't understand the rules. I think it's ruined cricket, but I love the cricket. I love following it. There you go.
There we go. I was something I never knew about you, John.
Oh, well, thank goodness.
There we go.
So we always ask all our guests to share their favourite bit of slang or dialect from the sector. And you used one of my words earlier on. You used manky.
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 Manky, boughing and honking.
Aye.
Yeah.
This one is actually prompted by the interview you did with Robert Robb, who another guy I thought the world and still think the world of was a scoof. Now, some people, the English call it totting, which means the refuse collectors looking through it, and they call it totting. In Sockets it was called scoof, in Kilmarnock it was called scran, and in Glasgow it was called proch. It's all the same thing. It was totally banned in Sockets. I only saw it once in 7 years. I saw them up at the top of the garage with a bag, and by the time I got up, it ran up, it disappeared. So that's my favourite word is scoof.
Goof.
I've not heard of that one before, actually.
No, all the ones you mentioned there, I never knew. I've heard of it, scran and all the rest.
Yeah.
I never knew where they all came from. If you know what I mean. I just heard about them.
Well, and then they used to talk in the Drumgrain landfill. We talked about, they called it walling scoof, and this was a guy who'd worked in the farms, and I'm told, late far told me, he never grew potatoes, but there's a process of going through potatoes and removing, physically removing detritus and stones and stuff like that, and that was called walling tatties. And the cow man at Drumgrain used to say, talk about walling scoof. There you go.
Here we go.
Yeah, fair enough.
Robert Robb, episode 30. And
That's what you were looking for, was it?
I was looking at that. I was looking that up as we went.
No, see, the thing is, in East Ayrshire, we were lifting cardboard and paper off the commercial customers for nothing. And Robert come up this day and he says, "Why are you doing that? Why are you not charging them?" And I thought, well, I don't know. And he says, "Look," he says, "you're stupid. You're daft not to look at it." And we started doing it, and we actually ended up with getting more tonnage of cardboard and paper than when we charged for it than we did when it was free. And I raised this in an online consultation with a CIWM colleague about 6 months ago, and he says, what you've done is you've actually given value to the waste, and he says that's why people are then going looking for more to give you. I mean, okay.
There we go. So we always give all our guests a chance to have a magic wand, John.
Yeah.
I know you're not active in the industry, but
Right.
what would you like to see changed?
I would like to see every one of the 32 councils required to appoint a properly qualified and experienced director of cleansing. Somebody who has spent at least 10 years in the waste business, has got the proper qualifications and training. I would like to see them that the appointment had to be ratified by the Scottish Minister for the Environment, who would pay 40% of their salary. When I started in the Borough Surveyor's office, he was the Borough Surveyor and Sanitary Inspector. 40% of his wages was paid by the then Secretary of State of Scotland. What it meant was that if he did something the councillors didn't like, that he could only be appointed and sacked with approval of the Secretary of State for Scotland. And that would give us two things. If you had a director of cleansing reporting directly to the chief executive, it would make it so much easier for the rank and file refuse collectors in knowing that they had a hotline right to the top. There are far too many councils where the director in these multidisciplinary departments hasn't a clue and isn't even interested in what the cleansing service. The cleansing service goes to every home most weeks of the year. It's unique in that fact. And to have the most senior qualified cleansing officer at a third or a fourth year taste is selling the service short. So that's what I would do. That I would have a dedicated, and there was no way they could be appointed or sacked without the approval of the Secretary of State. And what it means is that when councillors, as is nowadays, come in and try and bully or tell people, and they just say, no, I'm not doing it. And they've got the confidence and the cushion that they know that they can't just get sacked. That's what I would do. That's it's crying out for it. It's a win. It's appalling, actually.
Mm.
I like that one.
The only good news is that through again your link, I'd never met him before. I've been in touch with Tom Reid, and he's again a guy. I knew his father well. He's a great guy, his father, and Tom's actually getting to a position where he can influence. But in so many other places, the most senior cleansing officer hasn't got a chance. They put up reports, and somebody looks at it and says, "Oh no, I'm not doing that." There's no question of what are the consequences of not doing this.
Yeah.
You know,
I thought Tom's interview was really refreshing, John, just in terms of how he was approaching things. From, just getting the basics. Just getting the basics done well seemed to be his approach.
That's what it is. It's pragmatism and innovation. Listening to everybody and learning from other people's mistakes. And I used to say to people who work for me, look, the man or woman that never made a mistake never made anything. But if we make a mistake, we learn from it and we don't make the same mistake again. That's it. It's no rocket science. And as you say, it's basically people put their rubbish into a container and we take it away. That's it. There's not much more to it.
Absolutely.
And I've got a last question here, John. And finally,
okay,
what advice would you like to give the younger generation coming into the sector? Yeah, this younger generation, what would you say to them?
I would say to them just what I've said. Read as much as you can. Sadly, the CIWM journal now it's not giving you the information that I had as a young cleansing officer. It used to be packed full of stories, lectures and papers for people that were doing the job. That's not there. Without trying to push it, I would say Skip Waste magazine. Right, there's as much information in that now, and not from me, by the way, but from other people that do. Listen to everybody that's saying, work out and look at people's results, and not just the hot air specialists that we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do that. Look at what happens. We were promised that the 5p carrier bag charge would solve the litter problem. Didn't work. We were told that the DRS would solve the litter problem. Even if they managed to get it in, it still wouldn't have worked. And they need to be objective and be pragmatic and seek out innovation. That's what I would say to them. And don't be scared to ask. Don't be scared to go to the likes of the Alistairs of this world and the Colin Clarks or the Tom Reids and say to them, look,
or even Jane Bond.
The people are wanting this. Jane Bond.
Well, I was going to say he's left you out, Jane.
Come on, John.
No, but that's no. I don't have a problem with that, But there's far too many of them are getting. They're not getting encouraged. They're not being enhanced. There's no. I had, as a young officer, I was getting into committee meetings. I was dealing with councillors. They're not getting that chance now. I was in among the bin men and stuff like that because of my late father's business. I was working at one time with all the guys with the picks and shovels and the trucks, and I knew how they thought, how they saw the bosses. And I thought, I'm not going. If I ever get that to that level, I'm going to make sure I'm not going to do that. And I mean, it's just basically. I think we need to be training more people. We need formally training them. I think it's shocking that the Scottish Executive or the Scottish Parliament, whatever they call themselves now, are just allowed the environmental health training to go out on a limb. I know Alistair and I aren't in like what would be traditionally called environmental health, but they're going to be short the environmental health officers in the next decade. And I hope it doesn't get down to what happened after the Second World War when they started retraining plumbers and sanitary as sanitary inspectors and stuff like that. That's not the way. We fought too long to get this an all-degree profession, and it's just been thrown out with the bathwater. So that's what I would say.
Sounds good, John. Sounds good. Well, thank you. That's us exhausted all our questions. I think that was certainly for some of our older listeners, that will definitely be a trip down memory lane, John. I think there's probably names and people you've mentioned that will flash up a lot of memories with people.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, John.
This one's going out live. This is our first of 2025 ones, so this is going out as a headline act, John.
No,
so
well,
you're not getting away that easily.
I'm the turn.
No, absolutely not.
So thank you very, very much.
Well, thanks very much, and wish you and Jane and Mia and all the people at the consultancy all the best for Christmas and New Year, and carry on with good work. It's doing an excellent job. Thank you.